But first, I want to talk with you about the Pygame library. Pygame was developed natively for Python and specifically for the purpose of creating games. Most of them are what I would refer to or call like an arcade style game. So you're not going to be looking at creating the next Fortnite or World of Warcraft or anything of that level of complexity. The games that are best created with Pygame are relatively simple, and that makes it a good place to start when you're thinking about making games, because creating games is relatively complex, of course, depending on what kind of game you want to make. But Pygame, what it does for us is it makes the management of game objects and certain scenarios that happen in a game relatively simple to work with. Things like collisions between objects, or joystick controls, or updating the screen, things like that. Score management, player management, all of those things are much easier with Pygame. You can absolutely create a game from absolute scratch using Python. You 100% can do that. I don't recommend it. Pygame makes it a lot easier. And if you go to the Pygame website, you can actually see and download a lot of sample games that people have made using Pygame to give you an idea of sort of the scope and what you can do with Pygame. And there are some pretty impressive games there. Not all of them are simple, but for our purposes, we're going to focus on some very simple game. And when I say simple, if you were to travel back in time to like 1989 and go to a arcade, that's the kind of games that you would see in Pygame, or that we'll be looking at making in Pygame. So that's sort of, I just want to set everybody's expectations here. We're not going to be making anything really mind-blowing, no 3D effects or anything like that, unless they're fake 3D effects, which is totally different. I don't know if you guys know this. So you've heard of the game Doom, perhaps. It spawned a movie and all kinds of terrible movie, by the way. But it was really groundbreaking because Doom was the first game to use a 3D, what they call texture mapping, which is they take surfaces in the game and map textures onto them using a standard texture. That game actually wasn't 3D. It was actually it was engineered to give the illusion of 3D. And the creator of Doom has done some really interesting interviews. There's one with Tim Ferriss where he was on a guy named, he's a podcaster. But if you're interested in video game history, and particularly that part of video game history, it's pretty interesting. But so we're going to be very, very simple using Pygame. So some of the things it does, Pygame makes the structure and objects of the game easy to use. It actually has objects that we can modify using inheritance, using the things that we just learned a couple weeks ago. It manages what are called sprites. Sprites are what you can think of as the movable or interactive elements in a game. So in, let's say, Pac-Man. Everybody's heard of Pac-Man, right? In the Pac-Man game, the sprites would be Pac-Man, the ghosts, and all the little dots that you gobble up. Those are sprites. Okay, so the things that move around the screen, typically that you can bump in, that something happens when they touch or something happens when they bump into each other, would be sprites. Pygame handles screen updates, and what you're going to see is that every time something moves on screen, it constitutes a screen update. And Pygame does that for us with a very simple command. It also makes it really easy to interact with stuff on the game by making keyboard and even game controls easily available to us. I mean, really easily available to us. That's really nice. It handles sounds, it handles writing on the screen, it handles drawing on the screen. So all of that stuff that happens in a video game that we just sort of take for granted is made easier by Pygame.